parliamentary committee in South Australia has recommended the lower house find the Deputy Premier Vickie Chapman guilty of contempt for misleading Parliament and for having a conflict of interest in a planning decision. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Leah McLennan in Adelaide. Leah, take us through this decision.
So this does date back to when the Deputy Premier, who had just recently taken over the portfolio as Planning Minister, decided to disallow an application for a port development on Kangaroo Island that was designed for the timber industry, or planned for the timber industry. Now, questions were raised around whether or not the Deputy Premier Vickie Chapman had a conflict of interest in making that decision. Basically, she grew up on Kangaroo Island. Her family is well known for its very long connection to Kangaroo Island. She had inherited family property on Kangaroo Island, which was actually close to a timber plantation that would have been affected by this port. It would have been felled, trucks would have been driving in and out of that plantation. So that's why the issues of conflict of interest were raised. At the time, the Deputy Premier basically said that she had looked at this, considered it and decided she did not have a conflict. She was satisfied and went ahead and made the decision that that port should not be built. What has happened in more recent times is that the circumstances in the lower house of Parliament in South Australia have changed. There was a defection from the Liberal side. One of their MPs became a crossbencher and then became Speaker, and the numbers, the crossbench has been growing with various independents, and it means that the numbers were then there that Parliament could launch an inquiry into this decision. So that inquiry, and it's been quite an unusual style of inquiry for a parliamentary committee, it's actually been run by a QC, a Queen's Counsel, rather than, while it did have a parliamentarian, a Labor MP as chair, that QC was largely running the committee. Now, that committee has found that the Deputy Premier both had a perceived and actual conflict of interest, and so when she was discussing these things in Parliament, it found that she had breached the ministerial code and misled Parliament. So that was the findings of the committee. Today, a report with its recommendations was tabled in Parliament, and that's where we heard these recommendations that the committee had found that she was guilty of contempt of Parliament, that Parliament should find that, that she did have that conflict of interest, and that the consequences of that should be a suspension of 9 days from Parliament, and that she should unreservedly apologise. Now, it's worth noting that there were 2 Liberal MPs on this committee. They dissented to this report, did not agree with its findings and recommendations, and there was another Liberal MP who spoke in Parliament in defence of Vickie Chapman, saying that the report didn't have the evidence that it said that it did, and that potentially by doing this the committee is actually bringing Parliament into disrepute. Now, we haven't heard directly from the Deputy Premier since those recommendations, since the report was tabled in Parliament, but what we're expecting is more developments in this matter this afternoon, when it's expected that Parliament, or that the opposition, will attempt to move a motion of no confidence in the Deputy Premier. And given what is happening with the crossbench in the lower house, there is a fairly good chance that that motion of no confidence would get up, and that would be fairly unprecedented at least in recent times in South Australia's Parliament. And so once that happens, we'll have to see what the consequences of that would be.
Leah McLennan in Adelaide, thank you.
Thank you.